John, are we ready to kick off?
Yes, we are, Mr. McGoey. Take it away. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to today's community forum. The title of the program today is Mission in Action, Housing Insecurity. My name is Tommy McGoey. I'm a member of the VOA Southeast Louisiana Board of Directors. And I serve on this board because I've seen the organization's commitment to the community, to the most vulnerable populations in our community, and to their effective record of addressing the community's needs.
Now I have to pay for the guy to come install it.
Yeah, but you know which guy to call on, the cheap guy.
Hey, please, if you would, mute your lines. Thanks, appreciate that. So VOA CELA does its good work in the community through about 20 different programs, but we want to take a deep dive today into one of those, and that's programs directed at housing insecurity. And the organization works from multiple different angles on this issue. We both develop affordable housing. We act as a property manager for affordable housing sites. We provide case management and community health services at housing sites for the community. We provide veterans housing and also behavioral health services to folks who are in need of permanent housing. I'm going to get out of the way and turn this over now to VOA CELA's President and CEO, Voris Vigi. I hope you enjoy the program.
Thank you, Tommy, and good morning to everyone here today. Thanks for attending our 6th Community Forum, and I want to give special thanks to State Representative Mandy Landry and Cashauna Hill, who is the Executive Director at the Fair Housing Action Center. And by engaging members of the community, public officials, and donors, we hope to find new needs and opportunities with the people we serve being the ultimate beneficiaries. At the same time, we love spreading the word about the work that we do because we serve more than 47,000 of the most vulnerable individuals in our community. They receive support and care from Volunteers America Southeast Louisiana. And you may be asking yourselves, what does it take to support the men and women and children of our community? Well, it's people like you, it's the people who are a part of our team here at Volunteers America, and it's the folks who we serve day in and day out. And it takes a lot, but we know that people are committed to the mission of Volunteers America, and that's what's important. Now, this year, our funding gap increased as a result of Hurricane Ida. And we understand that we have work to do for the children, the veterans, seniors, and those who struggle with addiction, and so many more. But we're not beyond, the situation where we know that we have folks who are going to be able to support us. It's not an impossible climb when there are people like you and people in the community who believe in the work that we do every day, because we know that the people in the community depend upon us. And so what you're here today and what we'll talk about is about how Volunteers America supports the struggling, those struggling with housing insecurity, those struggling with identifying quality housing. Today, you'll learn more about Renaissance Neighborhood Development Corporation, along with our supportive services for veteran families program. And this particular program provides services across the state of Louisiana and not just within our 16 parish area. The work that's being done by these folks ensures that every person has a safe and affordable place to live within our community. So enough about where we are today and why you're here. We are going to proceed forward with this particular program, and I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our Director of Government and Community Relations, Nick Alvarez. Nick?
Great. Thanks so much, Voris, and thank you all for being here today. I'm excited about having a chance to speak with such an impressive group of panelists as I moderate this discussion. So as you've heard already here at Volunteers of America Southeast Louisiana, housing is foundational to what we do. So you're going to hear more about our affordable housing development program, along with our efforts to provide case management and housing for unhoused veterans and their families. But in addition to these programs, we also provide housing for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We partner with the state to provide permanent supportive housing services for unhoused people with behavioral health challenges. And we provide housing for unhoused people in recovery, just to name a few of our services. So at this point, I'm going to get started introducing our panel. I'm going to introduce each of them individually, and then they'll give an opening statement, and then we'll move to the next panelist. Now, as we go throughout the program today, if you have a question that comes to mind, please drop it in the chat. I'll try to group as many questions as I can together if there's similar themes, and get to as many questions as possible so that we can keep this a real interactive discussion. And as a reminder, please mute your line throughout the presentation and put any questions you have in the chat. So I'm going to begin by introducing Devon Phillips. Devon is the manager for the Supportive Services for Veteran Families program here at Volunteers of America Southeast Louisiana. Devon's celebrating 10 years with the organization this month, and throughout his tenure has worked on issues of mental health, substance use disorder, and chronic homelessness. Mr. Phillips is a graduate of Texas Southern University and completed his master's in social work from Southern University, New Orleans. I'll now turn it over to Devon.
Thank you, Nick, for the introduction. As Nick stated, I've been with the agency for the last 10 years, working with the Supportive Service for Veteran Families program. At the time in 2011, when SSVF came into existence, we were one of the first 85 grant recipients for the contract. The grant was not supposed to be running for this long, but we've continuously, this month, we actually celebrated our 10th anniversary for SSVF for the great work that we've done in the community. We cover the New Orleans, well, I'm located in the New Orleans area, but as Ms. Vorez stated, we cover the entire state of Louisiana. We have offices in Baton Rouge, Lafayette, Lake Charles, and we also have Alexandria and Shreveport, which covers into Southern Arkansas region. Every year, our grant is to service 600 veterans, which we've exceeded that amount on an annual basis. With that, we provide homeless prevention, rapid rehousing services. We assist veterans with employment. We assist them with substance abuse, linkages to mainstream resources such as HUD-VASH, Veteran Affairs, healthcare. SSVF is broken up into several components as well. We have case management team, we have outreach, we have a housing specialist, and we have all of those people working together to make sure that the veteran is stabilized once they exit from SSVF. So with each component of SSVF, each person has different roles that they're helping that veteran to navigate and also obtain permanent housing. We provide TFA, which is temporary financial assistance to those veterans, which can assist them with rental payments, veterans that are pending evictions, helping them to get stabilized in their housing, or veterans that are actually on the streets, which is rapid rehousing. With rapid rehousing programs, we provide those veterans from shelters or on the streets, uninhabitable places, into permanent housing by paying deposits, rents, utility assistance, and things like that.
Great. Thank you so much, Devon, for giving us that overview, and we look forward to your contribution to the discussion as we continue the forum today. I'm now going to introduce Victor Smeltz. Victor is the Executive Vice President for Housing Development here at Volunteers of America Southeast Louisiana. And Mr. Smeltz has more than 25 years of experience in housing and community development. And he's charged with implementing our agency's strategy to create 1,000 units of workforce housing throughout Southeast Louisiana. He's a graduate of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and is a registered architect with the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards. Victor, I'll turn it over to you. Victor, I think, yeah, there we go.
Thanks, Nick, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures from a slide deck here. As Nick mentioned, we're working on we've been working on the housing development initiatives here with Volunteers of America, and through our subsidiary, which can everybody see my screen here? Is that showing up? Okay.
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, this subsidiary is a joint venture of the New Orleans affiliate of Volunteers of America in the national office, and we were set up about a year after Hurricane Katrina specifically for mixed income workforce housing redevelopment as a result of the storm many years ago. However, we have since expanded our efforts throughout the state of Louisiana. We're now right at about 1,000 units. We've got about 500 more that are currently in construction, a number more in development. And the apartments, the communities that we build serve Louisianans at a variety of income levels. Very low, no income households ranging up to a certain number of them are market rate, discounted market rate households. And we do that because we want to provide affordable housing, but we found that we're most successful when we build housing that is available to all members of the community so that you get a housing development that is more reflective and inclusive of the overall community in which we're situated. I'm just going to show you a couple of these, and some of these you may be familiar with. This is the terraces on Tulane, which is 200 apartments for low-income seniors on Tulane Avenue. This was developed shortly, one of our first properties after the storm, to provide replacement housing for low-income seniors who had been displaced because of Hurricane Katrina. This is moving over to the North Shore. This is a planned unit development called the Groves at Mile Branch near downtown Covington, serving again a mix of income levels of family housing. As an adjunct to that, we've also developed houses, and these are rental units that are mainly financed under the low-income housing tax credit program. But an interesting twist with this one, it provides rental houses as part of this development. And after a 15-year compliance period, these units can actually be purchased by the family that is then living there at the time. So it provides another measure of longer-term housing and paths to home ownership, which we're pretty excited about. A couple of properties in Houma, Louisiana. This is the Bayou Cane. It's 82 apartments for mixed income households. And one that's been especially popular is the Academy Place, which we've done along with new development. We have developed historic properties and converted them to housing. And this was an elementary school right in downtown Houma that had been vacant for many years. And we converted this to senior apartments in the existing school building, along with a new building on the same site that then complements the entire block. And this has been very popular because in addition to the affordable housing, the architecture is very interesting with the high ceilings and the original woodwork, and the seniors have really adopted this and made it their own. So we're very pleased with some of the impacts in the community. And then just to round this out, some things that are currently under construction. This is another cottage development also in Covington. As I mentioned, we moved in now to Baton Rouge. This is a 122 unit development near downtown Baton Rouge called Valencia Park. This one has an agenda to serve up to half of the apartments to serve veterans, which is another population that Volunteers of America endeavors to serve throughout the state. And I would also mention that we're currently working on 3 sites in Lake Charles, we wanted to enter that market, and now with the recent storms that they've encountered over the last year or so, we're working with partners there in the Lake Charles community. That is all I can contribute right now. I'm really delighted to be here, and I look forward to further conversation and dialogue with the attendees.
Thanks a lot, Victor. Appreciate that. And, you know, Victor and I have been talking in recent days just about the recent continuing resolution passed by Congress that we hope will provide some opportunities for additional affordable housing in areas impacted by both Hurricane Laura last year and now Hurricane Ida this year. We're going to continue on now with our opening statements from our panelists. And we're really excited to have Cashauna Hill with us. Cashauna has served as Executive Director of the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center since 2015, where she leads a team working to fulfill the organization's mission to end discriminatory housing policies and practices through litigation and policy advocacy, along with fair housing trainings and foreclosure prevention counseling. Ms. Hill's background includes successful resolution of fair housing and lending claims through administrative and court processes. Cashauna, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Nick. I'm really excited to be here, and thanks to everyone for joining. Thanks to the VOA of Southeast Louisiana for putting this together. I am going to have to start with an apology, and then I'm going to have to hop off at 11:30 for another convening that I need to be a part of. But Maxwell Chardulo, who is the Director of Policy and Communications at the Fair Housing Action Center, will be taking my place. And oftentimes people enjoy hearing from him even more than they do from me. So you will be in very good hands. But I just wanted to share a little bit about the work that the Fair Housing Action Center does, and just again want to say thank you to VOA for putting this together. This is such an important conversation, but the work that we do is focused on ensuring that everyone has equitable access to housing across the state of Louisiana. And so we work to ensure that people with disabilities, people of color, low-income people have equitable access. These are groups of folks who have historically been excluded by some housing markets and have been historically marginalized in many other ways. And so those are the groups that our work focuses on. We do work across the entire state. We don't provide housing for any individuals, but we do work with developers at times when they are facing sometimes barriers to building affordable or accessible housing, and those barriers may come in the form of the actions of local elected officials. There may be zoning restrictions that have to be dealt with. Oftentimes there is what we call NIMBY sentiment, not in my backyard sentiment, among neighbors and homeowners who might not be interested in having neighbors from these groups, right, moving into their communities. And so the work that we do is very holistic, and again, with community members in mind, in partnership with community members and community-based organizations. We do represent people who have experienced housing discrimination for free. We provide those legal representation services. And again, just the goal is to ensure that everyone does have equitable access to housing. And so we do that work in a variety of ways that Nick mentioned, not only through legal services, but also through foreclosure prevention counseling, through educational and outreach services, including fair housing trainings. And then we also do policy advocacy work that Maxwell leads and that he can share a little bit more about as we get to the question and answer session of today's discussion.
Great. Thanks so much, Cashauna. I'm going to introduce Representative Landry now, but before I do, just a reminder that if any questions come to mind throughout the presentation, feel free to drop those in the chat. I'll try to get to as many as possible. So now, Mandy Landry grew up in a working class home in New Orleans. She's the first person in her family to graduate from college, and she's been a lawyer and advocate for others for over 15 years. In 2019, she was elected to the state legislature as a first-time candidate. And as a legislator, it is important to Representative Landry to ensure that all voices are represented at the Capitol. And having been up at the Capitol for quite some time, I can attest that that is true in the halls. So we thank you, Representative Landry, for your service We thank you for being with us today.
Hey everyone, good morning, and it's good to see a lot of familiar faces on this call, including my old colleague, Tommy. I'm the rep for District 91 Uptown, relatively new person. About half of the house is new for this session. And I kind of worked my way here through a personal story by being appalled. This was before I ran for office. And what was happening to one of my neighbors who was a low income renter, and how her property had been sold overnight and the rent went up $700 a month and all the stories y'all know. And I started digging into it from a lawyer's point of view and was just appalled at the almost complete lack of protections for tenants, in particular poor tenants in this state. And that's how I kind of got to working with Maxwell and Fair Housing and different groups. And it's been interesting to see that something I saw just as a regular person that led to legislation continues to get worse, because we see in Ida, not only were people who lost their homes down the bayou they are being threatened with eviction and other housing issues, but I see in my own district in New Orleans, people trying to use the storm or other issues as a reason to kick out low income tenants. It's also happening in Baton Rouge. So just to give y'all a little background, is that's kind of the angle I come at fair housing and equal housing issues. But of course, the number one issue is there's never enough of it. That, we could build another 10,000 units and there would still be a list, a mile long. So I'm happy to be here and answer any questions that I can. I'm always open for legislation ideas, especially anything that we might be able to get past some of the lobbyist groups. Thanks, Nick.
Great. Thanks so much, Representative Landry. And I think that's a great place to start our discussion, in what you mentioned. So just to give y'all an idea, the National Low Income Housing Corporation estimates there's a shortage of more than 100,000 affordable rental homes in Louisiana. And that's before we even talk about Hurricane Ida and the disaster we've seen unfold over the past 6 weeks or so. So there's a massive shortage of affordable housing. And so the question I'll pose to our panelists is, what policies do we need in place to generate more affordable housing? How can we get to a place where there's more affordable housing development? We're better able to provide, as a state, as a community, housing that people need.
Well, I would just offer a few solutions. So one is universal access to housing choice vouchers. Housing choice vouchers used to be commonly known as Section 8 vouchers, and maybe what people are used to hearing. But the housing choice voucher program does not provide access to housing for everyone whose income is low enough to qualify them. Right now, only about 25% of people whose income is low enough to qualify them for a voucher actually has access to a voucher, right? I know many of you may be familiar with the fact that, Hano's wait list for public housing and vouchers is closed because the need is so great, right? And so there are millions of people across the country who are low income, but because of a very limited amount of money that's available for the voucher program, they don't have access to a voucher or to housing that is affordable. So ensuring that we fund the voucher program at a high enough level so that everybody who qualifies can get a voucher is an easy way to do this, right? We definitely are going to need continued long-term investment in affordable housing. The federal government is really not in the business at this time of providing funding for affordable housing development, which is why we do have so much of the private-public partnerships that we see, the mixed income developments, because housing authorities are having to go to private developers really to get affordable housing built. And then those developers, of course, to offset their costs, have to build some market rate units. And so we're seeing mixed income developments because the federal government is not providing that infrastructure and those dollars to build affordable housing. So that suggestion is certainly part of the Build Back Better Act. And so we really need Congress to make sure that they fund housing as part of this big infrastructure and jobs bill. The other thing that I will say really deals with a paradigm shift at the local levels. We as community members and frankly as Americans have accepted this idea that existing homeowners and neighbors have a say over whether or not affordable housing gets placed in their communities. There's no law that requires that elected officials bow down to the whims or appease the whims of the not in my backyard sentiment. And so we continue to do that to the peril of people who need affordable housing, right? And so we're going to have to, at the local level, come to grips with the amount of power that we are placing in the hands of, a small number of homeowners. And if we continue to allow NIMBY sentiment to block affordable housing developments, we're never going to be able to build the amount of housing that we need in order to ensure that low-income folks have access to housing.
Thanks, Cashauna, and I'm glad we were able to get your thoughts before you have to go. And just as a follow-up, real quick, on the housing choice vouchers, so that is on the federal level, is that correct, the funding that's needed? And I was glad that you mentioned the Build Back Better reconciliation bill, because I was going in the same direction. Are there any more specifics you can share with what's being considered as far as housing policy in that package?
Sure. Well, I think this is where Maxwell may want to jump in a little bit because we're working so closely together on this, and then also with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, as you mentioned, Nick. But right now, there's some concern among advocates that the bill or whatever compromise is reached, right, will cut out all of the proposed housing dollars, and so that would really be catastrophic because we wouldn't see the kinds of investments in building affordable housing that we need to see. And then we also wouldn't see the kinds of investment in the voucher program that we need to see in order to ensure that low income folks can access housing. So it does feel a little unfortunate that, as we try and reach a compromise, housing immediately ends up on the chopping block.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's an important issue for follow-up. And I know you do have to run, so thank you so much for being with us. And we look forward to continued engagement. And we look forward to Maxwell's participation as well.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me. Bye, y'all.
Victor, I know you had some thoughts on this as well, of things that we can do here at the state level in terms of increasing the amount of affordable housing we have.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And I'm delighted to have a chance to visit with Representative Landry on this subject. I'm also the president of the Louisiana Association of Affordable Housing Providers, and we have just signed on to an initiative. Right now it's an ad hoc group between LAP and the Louisiana Housing Coalition, and I've asked the Louisiana Housing Corporation to participate, but to bring back a House bill that was introduced, I believe, by Representative Newell, 685, that would establish a state of Louisiana housing tax credit. And just briefly, for those of you who may not know, a primary financing vehicle right now for affordable housing is the federal low-income housing tax credit. It's an investment tax credit that brings us private investment equity from around the country, specifically for the development of affordable housing. And in return, we're able to reduce the rents and thereby serve lower income populations. Well, a number of states have done this at the state level. And it's basically the state version of that any corporation that has a Louisiana tax liability could invest in these developments and receive a tax credit. Now, of course, taxation and tax credits are always a hot topic item in any state, especially Louisiana. But we want to start this discussion, particularly next year, to get ready for the 23 session, to really inform legislators about not only the social impact, but the economic benefit to the state by the creation of additional jobs and investment in housing. And so be delighted to have include you, Representative Landry, in those as those conversations develop. It'll be at least a year-long effort prior to the session, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to bring this additional resource to the state of Louisiana.
Thanks for that. And actually bringing that up, I'm glad you brought that up, because my next thought was actually the property tax amendment coming up next year. So my colleague Rep Matthew Willard was supposed to be on the call with y'all, and he had to go out of town for work. You know, we all have multiple jobs in the legislature. But another important aspect, at least one that we're seeing in New Orleans, is keeping people in their homes. Right. And a lot of that has to do, the problem has to do with, you know, rising property taxes. Apparently flood insurance is going up for a bunch of us now. And so, you know, the opposite side of the coin of not enough housing is keeping the housing we have. And I'll just use this briefly to talk about the amendment that I'm actually really glad is on next year's ballot. Rep Willard got it through. I got to give him credit. No one thought he was going to get it through this year, and he did. And I know Maxwell and Stephanie Hilferty and a lot of people really help with that. But what it would do is address the property tax increases in New Orleans. It would cap them. I think, is it 10% per year, Maxwell? Is that right? Okay. A lot of things go into my head and fall out. It would cap it, and what that would address is we have some neighborhoods and even some streets in the city that, you know, the blighted houses, or just you know, general gentrification, but in some neighborhoods it's really, really fast, which that's Airbnb and all that's another problem. But what this would do is to help keep taxes reasonable, or more reasonable, for some of the people who you know, can't pay a $5,000 tax bill or a $4,000 flood insurance program. So that's going to be on your ballot next fall. And I say that's a good thing is because we have 4 tax related constitutional amendments on your ballot this year, and they're not wonderful. And I wouldn't want the property tax one to get caught up in the rhetoric around some of the other bills, because I think Rep Willard's bill is pretty purely focused on trying to keep more people in their homes in the city. And I hope we can keep following on that. Y'all know we have a lot of problems with state preemption, which is why this has to go through the legislature anyway. But, you know, keeping in mind half of the coin, or one side of the coin, is new housing, but it's also keeping people where they are, because that's just going to be, you know, a snowball effect. So I'm happy that he was able to get that through. Really proud of the Orleans delegation for helping him get that through, and hopefully we can keep that going next session.
Great. One of the things that I wanted to touch on, and Representative Landry, you talked about this in your opening statement, is just kind of those real practical barriers that people have to both getting affordable housing and then retaining affordable housing, as you just mentioned. And so I wanted to turn to you, Devon. You know, when you're working with folks just on a very practical level, day by day, what type of barriers are you seeing out in the community in terms of trying to get people safe and affordable housing and then maintaining that affordable housing?
So some of the challenges that I am seeing and have continued to see over the past couple of years is finding affordable housing, but finding affordable housing and locating affordable housing in rural areas. We have a lot of people that would like to live, you know, outside of the New Orleans area, but trying to find something on the North Shore, you know, in Bogalusa, those areas. We also run into the issue from the veteran standpoint, where veterans are possibly only receiving veterans benefits. So service connected, non-service connected benefits, cap income from Social Security disability, and things like that. So locating housing that's affordable when rents in New Orleans alone, a 1-bedroom FMR, fair market rents, is at $900 and something a month, and a veteran only gets $783 from Social Security. So trying to link them to mainstream resources such as HUD-VASH, which is similar to Section 8, and getting those vouchers, but having enough of those vouchers for those veterans that are in need of subsidized housing. So locating in the New Orleans area a unit for $900 is almost impossible. Still doable, but then also find that they're in rough areas. So trying to get those veterans where they're still comfortable and they can still maintain with their families and things like that just becomes some of the challenges that we face. But with our case management team, they've been very effective and efficient to locating units with hopefully utilities included, which also helps them to not have so much of a burden and trying to work with that and while obtaining employment and other benefits if they're eligible for it.
Great, thanks so much, Devon. And see, just to call to everyone's attention, Representative Landry put her contact information, her email address, and also Representative Willard's email address in the chat, along with an article that details the proposal that she described that's going to be on the ballot next year that relates to property tax increases and limiting those. And that is specific for Orleans Parish, but it is an important step for our city, I think. And Devon, thank you for bringing to light, those real challenges that you're seeing on a day-by-day basis. I did want to turn to a question that has come through on the chat. It talks about accessibility to affordable units, especially looking at issues with people who have disabilities. And so the question says, finding accessible, affordable housing for someone on SSI or SSDI is next to impossible. If apartment complexes were required to have more accessible units, this would help. Why couldn't every unit be accessible? So does anyone have any insights into accessibility in affordable housing?
Nick, I can offer a couple of thoughts. There are incentives under the tax credit program through the state of Louisiana to provide more fully accessible apartments as part of the points scoring categories. So developers are incentivized to do that. All of the apartments that are built, though, are adaptable so that if someone needs to make adjustments within their dwelling unit, there's the backing in the walls for grab bars to be added in the bathrooms, for instance, or base cabinets removed in kitchens so they have the toe space. So that is part of the building code now. Even though a unit may not be move-in accessible, they can be adapted if a resident ultimately needs that.
Thanks, Victor. Maxwell, do you have anything to add on that one?
Well, I can just say that in addition to sort of the lack of accessible units, I can also just add that discrimination against people with disabilities is one of the top forms of housing discrimination that we see at the Fair Housing Action Center. Race-based discrimination, discrimination against people with disabilities, and discrimination against people with children are always the top three categories that we track every year. So there are serious hurdles. And like Victor said, there are some requirements through the Louisiana Housing Corporation, and we regularly advocate for those to be increased so that we do have more available accessible units. But again, that's just a small portion of the market. The Louisiana Housing Corporation has created about 60,000 rental units across the state. We have 600,000 rental units in total in the state. So you're talking about 10%. And really, you're only talking about impacting the new units that get built, not necessarily the ones that already exist. So we need a larger paradigm shift if we're really going to impact that.
Maxwell, staying with you for a moment, you touched on discrimination, and I wanted to place the issues that we're facing now within a historical context. We know that racist policies have contributed and been a major driver of inequity in the housing arena. Could you talk about some of those historical practices and policies, what's going on today, and how those are interrelated and continue to persist?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cashauna mentioned before how zoning restrictions and neighborhood opposition can often lead to the scuttling of affordable housing developments. And there's a long history of that, and it leads back to explicitly racist zoning laws that many cities and local governments enacted in the early 1900s. Those were struck down by the Supreme Court, and essentially many cities just enacted large-scale single-family zoning without saying the racist part out loud, but it had the same effect. And if you look at most of our cities in Louisiana and across the country, they're still remarkably segregated, and low density single family zoning is a big reason for that. And another thing that I think everyone has probably heard about is the practice of redlining, which was instituted by the federal government in the 30s, which ensured that people of color didn't have access to low cost home loans in the neighborhoods that they lived in or anywhere. But did help subsidize low-cost home loans for white people in their neighborhoods. And if you look at the long-term impacts on that, the neighborhoods that were redlined still have the highest eviction rates today. They also had the highest COVID rates. And that shouldn't be too much of a surprise because research has shown that if we'd had a comprehensive eviction moratorium, we could have prevented 40% of all COVID deaths. I'm gonna say that again because most people sort of blinked the first time. If we'd had a comprehensive eviction moratorium, we could have prevented 40% of all COVID deaths in 2020. And that's because researchers have found that when folks are forced to leave their home, especially before we had vaccines, they ended up doubling up with other family members or in congregate shelters. And that is one of the most efficient ways to spread COVID, and often within intergenerational households, people who are most at risk. And what that means is that we chose not to prevent the deaths of disproportionately Black and brown people in formerly redlined neighborhoods. And I think, you know, those policies were set up with massive investments in segregation, redlining, the highways programs, federal highways programs that were run through Black neighborhoods, slum clearance programs. Those are massive federal investments in segregation. And we need to start inverting the way that we do community development and infrastructure work to actually ameliorate that. And that looks like ensuring that our affordable housing investments don't always get pushed into the same low-income Black neighborhoods, but are instead made in neighborhoods that already have resources. And ensuring that the flooding, streets, and infrastructure investments that have always been concentrated in wealthy and white communities should actually instead be concentrated in the neighborhoods that we've neglected for centuries.
Representative Landry, I wanted to turn to you, kind of going off that. What have you seen, you know, just in talking to constituents and in your area, as we've gone through these months of the pandemic? We've had the eviction moratorium that, you know, has been off and on, and then now with the Supreme Court stepping in and you know, putting down this most recent moratorium. I mean, what have you been seeing just in your district in terms of these housing issues?
Probably the most common housing complaint is that the rental programs have not really been working. The money has been sitting there for a long time. Axel's shaking his head. Y'all know what I'm talking about. We had federal money, we had state money, we had all this money, and it was coming out in drops. And so the same people who were asking for assistance last year with unemployment and relief checks had also been, you know, behind their rent and utilities. And they kept saying, hey, I keep getting letters. I know the courts are closed, but like my landlord doesn't really understand that. I applied. That's been the most common issue. And that kind of swings around to one of the larger issues we're seeing nationally now is why are we putting so many requirements on whether it's housing assistance or SNAP assistance or unemployment or whatever it is. We're basically cutting off our nose to spite our face with a lot of these programs by making the requirements so difficult to meet. I think, how do I want to say this? I don't think there was a wave of evictions, or there hasn't been yet. Based on what I've been hearing, it's mostly been the financial side of things, that they know that there was money there. They just didn't know if it was coming in. But I think some more things are coming A lot of leases are just coming up for annual, release. I think we're going to see more of that, but I haven't heard of that yet, just because the courts have been closed for so long. But I really wish we would get together both as a state and as a city, and whenever there are funds available or programs available. I mean, if we can't administer them quickly, they're almost useless with the money just sitting there. So that's probably the biggest hurdle I've seen in the last 2 years.
Can I jump in and clarify just for a quick second? And I just want to start by saying that Representative Landry is the most vocal champion for renters in the state legislature, and we have been so grateful to work with her on so many different issues. But I just want to clarify that evictions have been happening throughout Louisiana since June of 2020. There was a CDC moratorium, but I think that has sometimes been misunderstood to suggest that courts are closed or that there are no evictions happening, and that's just not the case. There have been about half as many evictions as happen in a normal year every week since June of 2020. So we have prevented some of them, but a lot of them are still moving, and that's because the eviction moratorium only covered evictions for non-payment of rent. So as Representative Landry said, a lot of people were being evicted because they were on month-to-month leases, and the landlord in Louisiana does not have to give you any reason or cite any violation to evict you if you're on a month-to-month lease. They just wait till the end of the month and say, I'm not renewing the lease. And a lot of landlords were getting around the moratorium by using that. So I think we should just be clear that there hasn't been a 1-month tsunami or like a single event where we've seen tons of evictions filed at once and tons of people displaced in 1 month, but there has been a slow wave of evictions throughout this pandemic that has not stopped. The only pause we had was after Hurricane Ida because of a governor's order, and that is now gone. And so we should expect, I think, to see more evictions. And again, because evictions correlate with neighborhoods that have lower levels of vaccination, and because Louisiana has such low levels of vaccination across the board, we should expect that it will correlate with more COVID infections and deaths. And even without COVID, we know that evictions correlate with all sorts of negative outcomes like preterm births, lower grades for kids, more mental health issues, families breaking up, parents losing jobs. It's really can be a preventable tragedy for entire communities. And we have some of the worst eviction protection laws in the country. In Louisiana, we're one of 7 states where you can be evicted for reporting a health and safety violation. These are some of the things that we are trying to tackle every year at the state legislature. Like I said, Representative Landry has been a key champion on this. And I think our affordable developer partners and managers like VOA are actually some of the models in the community as landlords. Like, I think you all do the right thing. And I think have an opportunity to be really incredible advocates when we go up and try and change these laws, because it really matters when legislators hear from landlords who say, look, I can live with this. This is a practice we already do, and it should apply to everyone else. So thank you.
Thanks for those insights, Maxwell. And, you know, these are really big issues, and I've been jotting down notes, and I've been trying to pull out some areas of hope and action amidst a lot of really difficult circumstances, really, and injustice, frankly. And so just to summarize a little bit, you know, I've heard the state low-income housing tax credit, which is going to be an initiative pushed in the 2023 legislative session, but a campaign that's going to start now. Also, the property tax constitutional amendment in 2022. Then I'm also just thinking about this general idea of this not in my backyard mentality, where we as just members of neighborhoods can kind of take that on a case-by-case basis, and just developing a different sense of neighborhood and belonging in our individual communities. And I think if we were to take that a step further, it would be digging into those zoning issues as possible. So those are some of the things that I'm hearing, but I want to turn back to our panel, and maybe we could start, you know, in the order that we began with Devon. What is an area of hope that you see, or an action item that people can leave with today?
Just being, as everyone has stated, just being aware of some of the challenges that are happening in the community. I think also that just bringing it to the legislature, letting them know that, hey, these are problems that we are facing in the community. I know from our standpoint on the federal level with veterans, just letting it be known and going to those navigation meetings that occur on a weekly basis, making it known that, hey, we have these veterans that are seeking housing, and not only seeking housing that is affordable, but housing that is affordable for them and their families to grow in, outside of the area in metropolitan New Orleans area, but in rural areas. Building those apartments, building those relationships with landlords, and just also having landlords that are coming to those meetings and voicing their opinions as well. And I think also from my standpoint in working with VOA, just being a guru with case management and being actively involved with those landlords to ensure that stabilized housing is available, because substance abuse also plays a factor into people maintaining housing, and just being that advocate for those individuals that need that advocacy to continue to be stably housed.
Great, thanks so much, Devon. And you know, when you said the word federal, it made me think of one other thing was that Cashauna had mentioned was the Build Back Better plan, and making sure that affordable housing investments are maintained in that.
And it may, and like you, as you stated, and Cashauna stated, in maintaining those, having that advocacy from the federal level continues to have people that are stabilized in housing long term, so we don't see that recidivism of people falling back into homelessness again. Because where we're seeing the recidivism of people falling into homelessness, it also hurts those that are coming along through the process that need permanent housing. So it's just, you know, helping one another to get to where we need to be to have stabilized housing throughout Louisiana.
Great. Victor, what about you? Message of hope or action items?
I do think that, yeah, NIMBY is something that we deal with all the time, especially as we try to cite new developments in higher income opportunity areas. It's a balance, because on the one hand, you want investment in lower income communities themselves, but then on the other side, we want access to opportunity for residents that comes through living in higher income areas. So I think it's a both and, but it's a delicate balance. I guess my hope for the future, and I've been doing this a long time, NIMBYism is alive and well, but I have found that the more that we do quality developments that are, you know, designed well, built well, and managed well, and we create a culture through the management of that apartment community that is reflective of, you know, I'll speak for the values of Volunteers of America, but we certainly don't have a corner on that market, but where you really are, without being invasive, it's taking a greater interest in the well-being of the residents and trying to figure out ways we can participate in that. When we do all this and we get it right, the property is successful, the residents are successful, and as neighbors see that, they start to see that, hey, affordable housing can actually be an asset to our community. It's not something to fear or to push away. So it's a long-term effort, but for hope for the future, I have seen in our world here being able to make progress, because every time we have another successful project, it makes the conversation a little bit easier.
Thanks, Victor. Maxwell, same question.
Well, I think the potential, maybe that my area of hope is also my action item, which is to say that I think it is hopeful that at least to start with, the Build Back Better plan includes over $300 billion in housing investments for the lowest income Americans most at risk of being homeless. That is an unprecedented investment that we just haven't made in maybe ever before. But there's also a threat, which is, as Nick and others have mentioned, that money's on the chopping block right now. It's between now and the end of the month is when Congress is going to decide exactly what ends up in that bill as they cut it from about 3.5 trillion down to around 2 trillion. And so it's going to be, if there is housing money that remains in that, it's going to be because people contacted their congressional delegation and let them know that that's important to them. So I would ask everyone on this call to just take 5 minutes today to write your senators in particular. And I know, we have Republican senators and maybe housing isn't always their top priority, but it matters when they hear from people. It matters because it means that that may be the issue they're less likely to yell about and call out as the problem in the bill. Maybe they'll talk about something else. And so we're working with national partners to really try and make that happen and make sure that our delegation is not an obstacle to this, and that makes it more likely that we keep some of that housing money in there.
Thanks, Maxwell. And, that's an important point. And, we hear about these big numbers, but, we really try to look at what's the human impact. I mean, just to take another area of the Build Back Better plan, there's substantial investment for home and community-based services that would greatly impact Volunteers of America by being able to stabilize that workforce. It's something we've worked on the state level a lot. And as I mentioned, we have housing programs for people, and we also have at-home home and community-based services. Substantial investment already. Reportedly, they've cut it down from 400 billion to 190 billion. And sometimes that just ends up being math, but those are real people, real lives we're talking about. So Representative Landry, you're going to get the last word here on any areas of hope and action items that you may have for us.
Nick, working on housing issues is quite a chore in the legislature, but I actually think, and I've started to speak to some people about it, this may be the year to get some good legislation through because of the tragedy of Ida. A lot of my Bayou area representatives have been very vocal about their displeasure with, people not having temporary homes for so long, but also the evictions and so many other issues going on. And, some of us in New Orleans are like, yeah, we've been telling you about this for a long time. And so I hate that, there often has to be a bad situation or a worse situation to improve something. But I think this might be the year to address housing issues, and also, on a related note, what's been happening with nursing homes in the state. I think we're going to see a lot of legislation around those two issues. I hope to be part of it. They're both housing and elderly housing are both overdue for huge overhauls. And so I would encourage y'all to be talking with your advocates and your groups on those issues. I mean, you are already doing that today, but more so on specific legislation ideas. And I think those are two areas that for once this year, you'll be able to get some bipartisan support on.
Thanks a lot, Representative Landry. And I look forward to talking with you about those issues further, and I'm sure others on the call as well. I didn't even line this up this way, but you mentioned down the bayou, and I did want to just do a quick PSA because this came out last night, I think. I got it, and we've had this forum planned prior to Hurricane Ida, actually. But Hurricane Ida has affected everything. So I did want to just do this PSA as we're talking about housing issues. This is short-term sheltering, but it's so important for people, and the state just launched this program. And so I put the link in the chat, idashelteringla.com. You can see the numbers on your screen as well. If folks down the bayou who are working in this area or who personally need assistance, I just wanted to start to get this out here because it just came through last night, and that's an important issue, and it speaks to the bigger picture issues that we're talking about in our area, in our region. We're glad to have the continuing resolution passed with the disaster response dollars in it, but we know we need more. And the Build Back Better plan, as we heard, is a start, and we've got some other action items. You know, my goodness, we could be talking about this, I'm sure, all day in the rest of the week. So it feels like we've only scratched the surface, but at the same time, I think we've had some really important discussions, and I hope that you've found some takeaways as we move forward. And so I'll leave it there because I do recognize we're over a couple minutes. But if you want more information, go to our website, www.voasela.org. And I have put my information in the chat. And I see that Maxwell has also put